Thank you all. I hope you enjoyed your morning, and we're looking forward to this afternoon session. So it is with great honor that I have the privilege to give opening remarks for today's keynote address. As preface to introducing our esteemed speaker, Paul Bourne, President and co-founder of Tamarack, an Institute for Community Engagement. Located nearby in Waterloo, but with reach across the nation and beyond. In no small way due to Mr. Bourne's leadership, the Tamarack Institute is a charity that develops and supports learning communities that help people to collaborate, co-generate knowledge, and achieve collective impact on complex community issues. Tamarack, an organization that is in support of learning communities, working in collaboration to co-generate knowledge. Sounds a lot like the work of a university, when understood as a community of scholars, of students, and of staff working together to produce knowledge. More to the point, it sounds a lot like the complex work of community-university engagement. Less a trend or the next big thing, as we would have you understand it here today. That is, less a trend and more a responsibility of any and every university to co-produce knowledge with and alongside its myriad of communities, big and small, near or far, in order to hear from a multitude of voices. To prepare these remarks, I delved into Paul's latest book. There you go, Paul. He didn't ask me to do that. Deepening Community, published just this year in 2014, and it's beautiful, I must say. At once a memoir of an individual life lived in the communion of others, from the sense of belonging he felt amongst the family in early childhood, to the continued sense of joy he finds in the company of others, here, close to home, and in spots across the globe. Deepening Community is also a multi-voiced tale. It tells the story of an individual, but only as it plays out in concert with the lives and stories of others. Paul's family and friends, first if not foremost, his neighbors, literally and figuratively, also his fellow citizens, and a whole host of thinkers, whose books and thoughts, and I gather lifelong friendships, Paul has drawn on to develop his own theory of community. Some 30 years in the making, it is a theory of community understood as nothing less than a state of being, thought of and developed over the course of a great career. That's right. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from a decorated thought leader and award-winning practitioner of community, be it in the building of place locally or in the development of community internationally, and more recently at Tamarack in more local forms of community engagement across Canada. So get this, to tell the tale as it stands to date, in working with what Paul refers to as his deep community of colleagues and friends, our speaker has started or built, with others, a dozen organizations, raised an estimated $100 million for charitable causes, and helped more than 250,000 people to live a better life. And to live a better life, like Paul and his colleagues have assisted so many in doing, is to give those people the chance to tell a better story, is it not? Not better in terms of quality, as if we could measure one another's lives against some ideal. Not that. After reading Deepening Community, I think Paul would say a better life is to have a story filled with joy, lived out with others amidst the triumphs and challenges that connect us over time. For Paul, as I think we will all come to realize in his address, the first act of community is found in sharing our stories with one another, which is, to my mind, a central piece of the work we are gathered to do here today, to create the conditions for community, allowing the possibility for partnerships to take hold. Here we are, facing one another at tables, sharing our stories and exchanging the knowledge we've gathered from our personal and educational experiences, all in an attempt to learn how our university allows our community to tell better stories. In this regard, there is much to celebrate and much work to be done, as we have no doubt seen today. But as Paul reminds us in Deepening Community, it is only the act of celebration and in the care and concern for one another that follows, where we feel encouraged to come together and tackle the tough problems that face us. It is also at this point where universities can come together with their communities in rigorous forms of engagement to co-generate knowledge for the betterment of all. So in preparing to come here today, Paul requested a conference call with the organizers of the event in order to better understand it and any learning outcomes. In response, the organizers met to have a discussion, took some notes about the day we were planning, and huddled around a table in order to hear from him. It proved to be a great call. After the call was over, and we had shared our stories of service and engagement, what I was struck with most was Paul's ability to listen in such a deep and intentional way, leading with wise questions and making such great conversation. What I did not know then, but what I believe to be the case now, after reading Deepening Community, is that Paul was beginning to build community with us, as only someone with his deep experience could. As he captures in his book, it is only when we really hear one another, the bond of community is forged between us. Paul Bourne holds a master's degree in leadership and is considered a global leader in helping organizations and communities develop innovative ideas that motivate people to collaborative action. As president and co-founder of Tamarack Institute, he has helped provide leadership in Canada on issues of citizen engagement, collaborative leadership, and community innovation. Currently, Tamarack has more than 12,000 subscribers to its various learning communities. Prior to his work at Tamarack, Paul was executive director and co-founder of the Community Opportunities Development Association, which is one of Canada's leading community economic development organizations, recognized by the United Nations as one of the top 40 projects in the world. In 2013, Paul was elected into the world's network of social innovators as a senior Ashoka Fellow, and that's one of the largest network of social innovators. So without further remarks, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Paul Bourne, who has so graciously accepted our invitation to join us at these tables in the act of sharing our stories.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so, Joel, I know you're doing a PhD, and that probably means you want to teach. But, if you don't get a career in teaching, eulogies has got to be right up there. There's got to be like an art form. Every one of you should get somebody to write something like that for you. So thank you so much. That was awesome. I also want to thank Anne-Marie for inviting me and for your team. Lisa for welcoming us when we arrived and carrying all these heavy books in. By the way, I think we have a book for everyone if you stay to the end. I'm pretty sure. We brought extra. I think there's more than, we brought 100, so that's how many I think that would be here. So thanks, guys, for all the work that you're doing. I also want to acknowledge Miriam, sitting there in the corner. She's my neighbor. You want to stand, Miriam? I want to embarrass you. I saw her like when she was, anyway. She's here at Western. And then my cousin, Melissa Bauman, is supposed to be here. So if you see her on campus, ask her where the heck she was. she goes here. She's my niece, actually, not my cousin, yeah, my boy's cousin. So I got some attachment here at Western. Also want to introduce on that table, back there, we have Kirsty Baptista, is one of our community animators at Tamarack. She lives here in London. And then Lisa Adigali, she's our director of engagement. And I kind of joke she should be the one doing this talk. And if you're particularly interested in online engagement, she's one of the foremost experts, I believe, in this country in thinking about that and working at that, and came to us from the private sector just a year ago from one of the largest marketing firms in Ontario. So fabulous team that we have at Tamarack, and it's great to be here with you. And I know that there's a mix of people. So if I was to say that you are a student here at the university, can you put your hand up? Maybe higher. Okay, that's great. And if you're if you get paid by the university for something versus paying. Okay. And then people coming here from the community. Nice. You crossed the moat. You crossed the moat into this place, and you made it through that maze, huh? To find this place. My God, I'm always struck by universities that way, They most have ring roads. You guys don't. That makes you kind of disorganized. It's kind of like there are certain countries that do that, where they build roads that go nowhere, and that's how they keep armies from attending and finding you, It's always an interesting understanding around engagement as well, that we end up creating these places, and these places become their own. I remember coming to university and trying to understand what this is all about. And I was never that good at school, so they actually, when I first came to university, they ended up putting me on probation because my grades weren't good enough, right? That was very interesting. I also found it very interesting that I only got my grades to increase in quality when I actually hired someone to edit all my papers and type them all out for me, back in the day when we still did that. I'm told now that would not be allowed. Never ask, But I went up about 1.5 grade point averages doing that. And I remember someone telling me, well, you're never going to have people do that for you in your life. And I said, why not? And it's been true. So it's this interesting place. I guess I'm just kind of sharing those stories more as a way of trying to enter into this conversation. And what I do know is that the people who are here are the converted. You're the ones who are trying now to figure out, how do we bring all of this richness, right? It's like a gold mine of knowledge and energy, and then you think about all the passion of the young people that are here, right? It's a gold mine for our world. And we're trying to figure out, and those of us who've come across the moat or who've went through those roads that go nowhere and found this place, we're trying to think, how do we bring this gold into our community? How do we make it useful on a regular basis? And I know many of you are the Sherpas that are dragging the knowledge out, bringing it back to your community, and trying to make something relevant from it. This is a challenge. My son, Lucas, is in his 5th year, and he went through co-op. At the University of Waterloo, has the largest co-op program in Canada. Some say the world. They like to say the world. And so co-op is you go to school one semester and then you work one semester. So we got a lot of practical experience and knowledge. It's a form of community engagement, essentially, to create programs like this that help students get ongoing experience and able to apply their learning in a very real way, then reflect on it. I find that actually what's actually more valuable than going out and doing the co-op placement is they've got to write a paper after, and they need to be able to integrate what they've learned. Very interesting. Okay, so 5 years later, this is what he says. He says, you know, Dad, it's not worth it. It's not worth going to university. Price goes up every year. I pay $3 more for a sub at Subway at the university than I do off campus. It's a big bone for him to pick, right? You know, the cost is creating an inequitable society. He said, most of my courses are not relevant when I'm out in the field. Most of my profs are prima donnas. I've got to conform to them every time. They don't want to listen. They don't want to talk. Now, he's in sciences. Most of you probably aren't, so you have different experiences. And probably you have better science teachers here at Western. And he said, so I'm coming out of this after 5 years, and I'm thinking to myself, it's not worth it. And I'm thinking to myself, I paid for that bloody education, and you're telling me it's not worth it, you know? Now, I find that interesting. I find that interesting not only because of my son saying that. I find it interesting because I'm hearing more and more young people saying that. You know what? I think universities are more relevant now than they've ever been. I think universities are trying harder than they've ever tried. I think there are smarter people about trying to make the integration into society than they've ever been before. And places like Western are amazing. But guess what? You're not doing it fast enough. Particularly in the age of social media, in the age of young people being able to live live, literally live. They are there, they go onto their social media, they go onto their computers. Everything is now. They engage in reality immediately. Whether you believe in the reality they're engaging in or not is not even important to them. It might be to you, but they're engaging now. They are in the world. They are in the world constantly, right? And they are constantly testing everything that is being said from 10 to 15 to 20 sources at a time. And more importantly, they're testing it with their peers. So when we kind of worry about the fact, right, that we're relevant or not, or even the context of this conversation, to me, we got to take it up one notch, maybe two, maybe three. For me, it's the very essence of whether this institution will be relevant and will be accepted as relevant into the future. And I know that I'm coming here as a community activist, and I'm looking at places like this that I'm, in a sense, putting judgment. That's not what I'm trying to do, though. What I'm trying to say is that we're not keeping up with reality. And the young people who have put this gathering together, my hope is that this is the beginning of a movement here at Western. That it's a beginning of saying and an awakening for people. That if we don't figure out how to make these roads more accessible to the community, if we don't get our young people traveling them every day, if we don't bring knowledge from outside in and inside out on a constant basis, our young people will consider us irrelevant. And I don't know about you, my son is extremely bright. He's extremely committed. He's extremely involved in the world. He's entrepreneurial. He owns his own house already, rents it out to 5 other students, right? For him to come through an education with great grades and to say it wasn't worth it. So this is an important understanding for us and an important moment being here together. It's much more important than we realize. I think it's very much the future of our communities rely on our universities and institutions like them saying, I want in. Lloyd Axworthy, the minute he came to the University of Winnipeg, adopted the inner city of Winnipeg as his school. Simon Fraser University moved a major campus downtown right beside the east side of Vancouver. Started teaching courses in philosophy with homeless people, with drug addicts. Not because that was part of what they saw was going to make their university better, it's because they had to somehow wake up to what was going on around them. And as we know, institutions like universities take a long time to change. You're not just the only institution that takes a long time to change. You're huge, you're successful. But there are many markers today that need to give you warning. You cannot continue to increase tuition and expect that you are relevant in this world when other countries are eliminating tuition. You cannot contribute to a world in which there is more haves and have-nots, because you are then destroying the society that relies on you. You cannot continue to produce knowledge that is not used. Ken Coates, good friend of mine, the dean at the University of Waterloo until recently, in the arts program, tried to get people to understand that when you get 100,000 hits on the web, it's got to be of equal value than to publishing in an academic journal that has 500 readers, what the average academic journal has. He's saying it's got to be as relevant. And yet he could not change the system to allow them to get credit when they get 100,000 hits on the web for something they've written. This needs to change. So that's my opening. And I want to talk about this with you. And I want to engage you in this. But what I want to do first is I want you to find two people you don't know. Okay, that's really, really important. And I'm going to actually ask you to change seats and try to sit with them. Okay? And I want you to form a triad. I want it to look like this. Sorry, your name?
Alina.
Alina, can you just face these two chairs? Yeah, I want the chairs to face one another. Peter Block would like your knees to be touching. A mentor. I want you to find two people you don't know, and if you could, find people that don't do the same work as you do. So if you're from the community sector, find someone from the university. Find a student. That'd be the ideal triad here, right? What I want you to do is I want you to share one of two stories. A time when you were really engaged at the university or through the university. Or, I think even better yet, I just didn't want to give you only this one because it seems too soft to some of you. Just tell a story of when you were really, really engaged. And it could be coming from your childhood. And explain to one another, what did that feel like? What does it feel like to be really, really engaged? Okay, so let's move it around. Find two other people you don't know. Form a triad. I'll help you find your partners. And then I'm going to put you, and then I'll put you into the exercise. But your first job is just to find two people you don't know. Okay. We are good. Are you looking for someone?
Sure.
Okay, hey, guys,
I know
we have one of the smartest men in this room. Right here. Do you know him? Well, everybody knows him. Okay, come with me. Let's go find some people. You guys all know each other? So come on this way. Come on this way. You don't know these two ladies? Look at that. You. Matchmaking on the side. Okay, here, pull in. We got a chair right there. Put another one down right here. You guys good? The three of you? You guys need someone. Okay, we got two incredibly handsome, beautiful, and smart people. You guys know each other? Kirsty, you want to join them? Oh, okay. Then you go. You go. How are you guys? You guys got 3? Everybody got 3? Everybody got 3? Are you guys good? Okay. Here are the instructions, everybody. Ready to go? Ready to go? Yes. Okay, here are the instructions. Who just wants to sit there? This is really quick. Hands up. Who just wants to sit there and listen? Hands up. One person in each group. The first hand up wins. Oh, you. Okay, you got someone in each group. Okay, your job is to listen, okay, and observe. Okay, now the second person, your job is to ask a question and only this question. Tell me more. Okay, and just like there's 1,000 ways to say I love you, there's 1,000 ways to say, tell me more. Oh my, tell me more. You got it? And you're drawing the person out. No other questions, your mind, just listen. Just engage, try to draw them out with your body and language. Just do tell me more. Now, who didn't put up their hand? Okay, you start. Tell a story of a time when you were absolutely engaged. And if you feel that that's not relevant enough, tell a story of when you were absolutely engaged at the university. You can do either one. But I really would love you to feel it. And then what you want to do is the person who's doing tell me more, draw the feelings out. Like, tell me more. Oh, tell me more. Like, draw the feeling out of the person, okay? Because I want to know, what did it feel like to be totally engaged? But first tell the story. Then go to the feeling. Don't switch until I tell you to switch. It's going to be like 5 minutes, which takes it's like forever telling your story. But try it and pull it out. Ready to go? Okay, let's start. Are you guys good, everybody? You're starting when you were absolutely engaged. Any time that you felt totally engaged. Okay, everyone, ready? We're going to move to the next person. So, if you, hold on, everybody. I know that some people are finished a long time ago, some people will never finish. So I just got to say, cut it down. Move to the next person. And in this case, the person that was observing, why don't you talk? The person that was speaking, why don't you become the tell me more, because that's your wind down period. And the person that was saying tell me more, you can now be more pensive and listen. Sounds good? Okay, let's go. 5 minutes or so. Can we now, I know it gets easier, huh? Conversations go longer. The person that was observing, it's your turn to speak because you're the third one. The person that was speaking has to wind down, so you're the one that does the tell me more. And then the person that was doing tell me more gets to rest. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that you can think of this third person as a person that's doing presencing. So they're actually observing, not only observing, but they're there to actually hold the space, as some people would say. So it's an interesting role. The other thing I'd really encourage you to do when you're the listener is listen to what's going on in the room. What's it telling you? What's going on in the room? So listen for the sounds. I love conversations. I've held thousands of them, and to me, they're like orchestras. There's a beautiful sound in this room. These people are you're very engaged with one another, which is lovely. Okay, let's do the third one. Nice. Did you hear that laughter? Watching you is very interesting, huh? And when you observe people in conversation versus people listening, there's a very different dynamic going on, right? And it's interesting because what you don't get is you don't get any of this. You don't get any of that, right? You know? And you very seldom get this, like, you know, the person's thinking about something, right? Or people pulling out their phones and starting to text. It's an interesting observation about how we are as human beings. In a sense, just by being in a triad, we feel ourselves responsible to one another. Like you can't check out, right? You're in a small group, it's impossible to check out, right? You're hearing stories. So what I'm finding that's quite interesting is that most of you are leaning in, probably as a way of hearing the other person, but still, it's a sign of engagement. It's a sign that you're present, huh? You know, did you guys get it? After the second person, when I introduced the third person to speak, did you get the spontaneous laughter? I don't know what that was, but for some reason, there was a high enough level of energy. It's like in music, when it starts to reverberate in a certain way, and then it just gives its own echo, right? It was like almost there was like an instantaneous connection, and it was across. It wasn't just in your group. We were talking to each other in a very interesting way. It's interesting observations about engagement and what responses they create. I want to debrief a little bit on this exercise, but what I'd rather do right now, just because of the given time that we have, I still want to take you through a case study and have us talk about that and think about that. You're going to find it a surprising case study. And then we'll have a more group conversation. Is that okay? But what I'd like you to do now, Joe, is just take a second, right? Just where you are, and what did you hear? What did you hear? And if there was like 2 or 3 words that would describe it for you, what you heard, what are those? You want to write those down? Or either write them down in your head or write them down on a physical piece of paper. What did you hear? What was the common theme about being engaged? What did it feel like?
Do you want us to tell you?
No, just want you to keep it until later. But I just want you to absorb it. Got it? Good. Okay, it's yours. Several months ago, not several years ago, just a little while ago, I was asked by the provincial government of Alberta to engage with Aboriginal people across the province. Now, oh, by the way, if you're on, you can move your chairs around. You're allowed to do that. Get comfortable. Stay where you are, though, because you're going to go back into a triad with these 3 people. And I'm thinking to myself, they just asked this overweight white guy, right, to go into Aboriginal communities and figure out what's going on. Like, no, thank you, right? Like, I'm not a masochist, right? But they were persistent. They had read Community Conversations, which, by the way, is a triple bestseller in Canada. It's now sold 3 times as many books as needed to be a bestseller. Doesn't that impress you a little bit? Very seldom that a community book does that, huh? And they had read it, and what they had said was, no, we've looked at all the other methods, we want this one. So I said, look, I'll do one for you, but you have to do it my way. Right? You have to do it my way. And there's no debate. I said, you're the provincial government, you suck at this, right? And I'm just not going to work with you if you want to do it your way, and it's going to get messy. Well, here's the problem. 68% of all the children that are taken from their homes in Alberta are Aboriginal children. Did you hear me? 68% of all children that are taken away from their homes are Aboriginal children. They represent less than 7% of the childhood population. Very interesting. Do you realize that there are now 3 times as many children in care than there ever were in residential schools? And if you think residential schools, for all they were or were not, right? A lot of these kids get shuffled 12, 13 times in their lifetime. You want to know what's messing them up? Here's the other thing. 10 years earlier, they declared Aboriginal children in care a state of emergency. Then it was 48%. They invested tens of millions of dollars and increased the problem to 67%. So here's a good argument that money doesn't solve problems. Matter of fact, it can make them worse if you invest in the wrong things. Guess what? Every caseworker we talked to said they were spending up to 2 or 3 times as much time. More than 57% of their time was being spent on paperwork. They did not have time to get in the communities. They did not have time to talk to children. They didn't even have time to do due diligence in terms of taking them out of homes. So lots of initiatives going on. Ours was one of them. And what ours was is get inside. Figure out what's going on. Get as deep into this issue as you can get. It's an ominous task, right? I just need to emphasize, I'm an overweight white guy. And I'm entering into a system on behalf of the government, right, that does not just not trust the government. These are the folks that took their kids away. How do you do it? First thing we did is we set to try to understand the system. What's going on? What we identified, and so we looked at our entry point, and we said, okay, let's find the child, let's figure out what the key point of energy is, as I call it. So the child being taken from their home. The system kicks into full gear at that moment. We identified 32 potential players that could get involved at that point. The child, the mother that lost their child, family that lost the child, mother that takes the child into care, the family that takes the child into care. I know there were once in a while fathers that took people into care, but like it's almost all mothers, right? Psychiatrists, doctors, police. Matter of fact, 2 or 3 levels of police, all kinds of caseworkers and social workers, right? Listed them all, courts. And we created a map. Looks like a 32 wheels, a wheel with 32 spokes. Just imagine, right? In the middle is a child, and then just 32. So we said, this is the system that desires change. You with me? These are the 32. All of them are deeply concerned about what's going on. That's the system that's calling forth change. That's the system that desires change. So we went out and began to identify in 10 regions of the province, we began to identify how that system lives out in every region. Now, we wanted to go a bit further. We wanted to say that in order for this conversation to have any level of authenticity, at least 60% of the people in the room needed to be Aboriginal peoples. That wasn't hard, because one of the things Alberta actually had done well is that a lot of the people that were involved in the child welfare system were actually hired. They're Aboriginal people that are hired in. So we were able to get them all. So what we were able to do is we were able to get people into the room, children that have been living in care, mothers that have lost their children to care, mothers that had taken their children into care. Guess what? That took me a month to fight. They did not want me to have in the same room mothers that lost their children to care and mothers that took children into care. They thought that there would be all this animosity and hatred and uncomfortableness between them. And guess what? We did a focus group. Everybody in the focus group knew each other. So what ended up happening is that for the most case, they already were working with each other, right? So it was a really interesting understanding. So we allowed that to happen, right? We had police officers there. It was an incredible mix. Then what we said is, in order for this space to have any level of authenticity, we needed it to be held by people that were deeply respected by everyone. And we immediately fell upon elders as being that. Elders were well respected both by the caseworkers, as they were by the families, as they were by the leadership in Aboriginal communities. What we set out to do is to build 10, our goal was to have 1,000 people in conversation, and we were going to do 10 100 groups, about this size, is what we put together. At each table, there were 8 people, and at each table there was as much of diversity as we could find, right? So mothers that have lost their children to care, mothers that have taken children into care, caseworkers that have taken children away and put them into care, administrators, psychiatrists, doctors. Interestingly enough, when we sent out the invitation, everyone, plus a few more, came. So it was just remarkable. They had not experienced that, and some people would travel half a day to get there. We set them up in a beautiful room. Often we couldn't find in smaller communities rooms on the reserve, so we'd go off the reserve to a hotel. We served great food. The night before, we would gather, sometimes we would have to stay over, and we would have a pipe ceremony, sometimes a feast. And we would talk and we would think about what we were going to do the next day. We'd often bring the 5 flags in and set them up, inviting the ancestors into the conversation. When we arrived in the morning, people were ready. Some of the people that had taken children into care, some of these caseworkers would come to me and say, "Paul, I haven't slept all night, and I was throwing up all morning. I have to be here, but I need to tell you how hard it is. I am really, really scared." You know, a lot of brokenness, a lot of pain. Not from only the caseworkers, there were the mothers, there were the children, and you could see the fear. You could see the worry. You could see that they've been to so many of these and they've been made to feel dumb every time, right? Well, we had spent several months working on the questions. And you know what our inspiration was? Anybody have an iPhone? Want to hold it up? That was our inspiration. We said that we had to come up with questions and a process that made everyone feel smart. That's why an iPhone's so successful. It's so dang easy to use. It makes you feel smart using technology, and it makes it happen right away. So we spent months testing and understanding the questions. This is how we started. First thing we did was we'd do a little introduction, maybe 5 minutes. Elder would do a, oh my God, it just slipped me. Sweetgrass. Smudge. I was going to say a cleanse, because they've just been through one of those. A smudge. Right? We'd do a smudge. People would come up, prepare themselves. And then what I would do is I would just say, give a little introduction to the problem that we're here to talk about. And then I would say, I want you to team up with 2 other people you don't know. And I would do kind of like what you did. I would kind of name the system. And I want you to sit down in a triad. And I want you to share. Why is it important that you're here today? Why is it important that you're here today? Honestly, they would sit together, a mother that had lost her child to care, a mother that had taken her child to care, and a caseworker that had taken the child, right? And they would sit there and look at each other for the first time in their lives, potentially. Or a police officer in full uniform. They all had to be because they're RCMP. And they would talk. And I would do exactly the exercise I had just done with you about feeling engagement. And you could just feel the tension start to drop. And by the 3rd conversation, the smiles would happen. And by the end of the conversation, the hugs would happen. And within the first hour, everyone in the room had come to a place. Then we moved to the 2nd question. Now we did these in groups of 8, in a circle. And we asked the question, again, very important that we ask it this way. What's happening now? That's all it was. Like a little button on the bottom of the iPad, of the iPhone. You just press it and it always comes back to 0. The front home page. What's happening now? Interestingly enough, it didn't matter if you were an academic with incredible knowledge, police officer with all kinds of training, or a mother that may have had grade 3 education on a reserve. Matter of fact, the mother with grade 3 education on a reserve could answer that question much better than anyone else. What's happening now? We'd have the conversation, then we had a middle circle, and we had the tables represented, and they'd come to the middle table, and they would debrief together with me about what's happening now, and we'd talk about that. Then we'd go to the next question. What's the change we want to see? Now, at every table, talk about academics, at every table we had a recorder, a trained recorder that I had worked with in advance and brought them all up to speed on how to do this so we could do recording consistently. No laptops allowed, everything had to be done with pens because we needed people to feel almost anonymous, that this person, and the person would seek permission before they would record from everyone. And they would not record names. They would just record sector, as we called it, right? And we recorded 16,000 individual comments during that time and put them in a database. And out of that, we were able to record very deeply what was said. Okay? Our final question. What can we do together? We did 10 of these. Matter of fact, we did 11 because I was asked by the Aboriginal Council to represent them and to host a process like that in order to deal with the social policy framework for Alberta. First time in its history, it was rewriting it. And that social policy framework, we were able to bring the Aboriginal voice into a very, very important process that was going to change things for them. So they asked us to do this 11th one. Here are the results. At the end of this process, we of course had all of this information documented very well, which then generated an intense report. When the focus groups around the report were brought together to look at the information, the most poignant comment and consistent comment, this one represented the most, was an Aboriginal woman saying, "I feel naked. You have exposed us." It's a beautiful statement. It was a statement of integrity, not a statement of embarrassment. It was a statement that you have so deeply understood us. When we reviewed all of the evaluations, we did these simple evaluations, but they were accurate. 97% of the people who attended those felt that their voices mattered, and 98% felt that they had been heard. Unprecedented in Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal engagement. Now, this last stat, there's no attribution. I do not take attribution. As a matter of fact, we're talking an awful lot as an organization now where we don't talk about attribution, we only talk about contribution. Because attribution, it's a bit of a dog's breakfast, huh? You know, so we talk about contribution. Within 6 months of this dialogue, the number of Aboriginal children in care dropped by 2.5%. Nothing was done. Nothing had changed. No explanation. So, back in your triads, what can this story teach us about engagement, and particularly between community and the university? What can this story teach us about engagement? Okay, back in your triads. Speak as three together. What are we thinking? What are we thinking? What's arising amongst you? What are some thoughts that you want to share with the larger group? Over here. I'd like you to stand, also just share your name.
I'm Mahida Rafiq. I'm a program coordinator of First Nation Studies, and the three of us had this rather interesting conversation. We analyzed your methodology, and I can very much appreciate the fact that you really made it very clear to the entire room that you're a white male and you're in an Aboriginal community. And we talked about the colonialism and the imperialism and the do-gooder attitudes that go into communities. And like Kara went to Honduras, and we talked about that in context of what you did here, bringing the people together, getting them to come face to face and facing that issue that needed to be addressed. And that was something that we got out of this.
Interesting. Good. Anything to add?
A question though, do you think it's possible for you to come in as a white male and address these issues without enforcing like colonial hierarchy and contributing to that?
Absolutely.
It's a very complicated question, but
No, it's not. It's a very easy question. Of course I can't. It's impossible, you know. But I never had less than 7 elders co-working with me. And they were always in the deepest and most respectful places, always in the circle, right? They would stand up and they would do the most amazing things. They would always close. They would always speak in between, right? They were the ones who were they were holding the spirit of the place, and they were the ones doing all the sense making. I refused to do any sense making.
You see, and
You know?
it's also very important in the hierarchy of things that when you sit in a circle, there is no head. Everyone is equal, and when you make decisions, they are done by consensus. I remember sitting in circle for hours of silence. Wrecks your nerves.
Yeah. Lovely, lovely. Others, observations, thoughts. Just your name and if you could stand.
Yeah, you bet. I'm Trevor. Whoop, knock this chair over. I'm Trevor, and I'm a Alberta Métis man.
Nice.
And I live here in Southern Ontario, so your story really speaks to me. I work for Indigenous Services, and we spend a lot of our time doing a lot of outreach and a lot of programming. So a lot of the questions and the comments you brought up really speak to us. And we were talking in our triad, and I brought up a quote from Kurt Vonnegut on Twitter. He's been dead for some years, but he's pretty prolific on Twitter. And what he said is he says that in today's society, people are more focused on building things than they are on maintaining them. And what that says to me from what you taught us in that case study was that the importance of building relationships really exists in the custodial and curatorial aspects of building an atmosphere and an environment where people feel comfortable, to be honest. And the community starts to generate itself quite organically at that stage. And in the Indigenous communities that we work in, it is paramount that every individual that we access from any age group, whether they be elder or they be youth, that they feel comfortable to communicate with us, and that we can communicate with them both culturally, in their language, and also at the level that says we are here to support. And it's an empowerment thing. And I feel like that came through in your case study.
Nice, very nice. Thank you for that. Others? Thoughts, questions, observations? Back way over here. Stand up and share your name.
Hi, I'm Janet Fraser. One of the things we picked out from the story you shared with us was the importance of dialogue, which is a very different concept than the word conversation. It goes deeper.
Yeah.
And with dialogue, apart from everybody being equal, recognizing, not being judgmental, you really hear what people are saying, and it doesn't matter whether you have a degree or not, or what level of education you are, everybody's comments and everybody's perspective is valued.
Nice.
That's
Nice.
it.
That's excellent. And that, I think that's a really important observation. And I'm just wondering, did you guys feel that in your group? Like, like, do you guys, like at the beginning we did that kind of artificial exercise where you take turns, right? The thing is, you can just be spontaneous, and it's a hit and miss, right? But when you're working in these types of deliberate ways, these types of exercises can really help to make you go deep very quickly. They can help you to hear each other very quickly, right? The other way works too. It just takes longer. Good. Others? Comments, observations? Way over there, coming through. Delilah.
Yes. It really spoke to me about the power of vulnerability, and I heard that in the stories that were told here too, that there was a moment of vulnerability that really either changed the experience or changed their perception of the experience, which then had a great degree of influence over, and a ripple effect out into their communities. And I heard that in your story as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. What part of the story affected you that way?
I think that there was vulnerability on your part. You expressed that right away. Your sense of disconnect between the perception you felt of yourself and entering into that community. So there's some bit of fear there and vulnerability. And certainly you expressed that there was that sense among the caseworkers, among mums, really entering into this experience that there was fear, there was a fear of the unknown. And then by the end, they were using that vulnerability and that fear, that sense of having come through that, at least in that moment, and come to a different understanding or a different perspective on it.
Nice.
And I really see that as a really important part
Yes.
of developing within a community and within an individual as well.
Yeah, very much so. And you know what I found really interesting and important in all of this is that we cried at every session. And we often cried often, and we would cry at points loudly. And I remember the minister, right, David Hancock, this big, strong, he was the acting premier for quite some time, just until recently. He would come to these sessions, and he would be sitting there, taking off his glasses, and be in full-blown tears, and to allow ourselves that experience, right? Everyone being equal, right? Never, ever taking away from the academic rigor that we were doing, the recording, the documenting, the understanding, the deep understanding, but absolutely integrating our humanity and being okay with that, right? And making it part of the process and a big part of being heard. Because as you react to someone's story, how can you sit there, and feel that it's okay what just happened to that individual, and not be moved. And that the being moved is an act of listening. It's an act of respect in that context. One more. And I want to shift after this to making the leap to what does this mean for a university? What does this mean for a university, and particularly around the idea of community engagement? Selvin.
Thank you. Hi. I just wanted to, sorry, I don't have to come back. I think this is a really wonderful opportunity to be part of this really wealth of exchanges. I think this is very important because myself, I used to be an alumni, Western alumni, through King's University College and main campus. And for the longest time, I used to think that the university community, the London community, and even the Fanshawe College community, there were three different bubbles that always kept on their own. And it is wonderful to see now that there's efforts are being made to reach out to the makeup of our diversity. And we're not talking, we can denominate it from an ethnic and cultural perspective, but I like to see the diversity as peoples from many walks of life, many backgrounds, regardless of gender, religion, creed. So I think it's phenomenal that we have opportunities to engage like this. This is what it's needed. The university is a resource for everyone. We should have available to. And as a representative of a nonprofit organization, I like to think that this is the reasons as to why universities should be here, to engage, to be part of the change that we want to be able to do. I'm very thankful that we're able to do this. To be honest, I hadn't planned to come to this event. It wasn't until 4:30 this morning that I actually clicked on the Eventbrite, and that's a true honesty. And the fact that I don't have a printed label. We've been really busy at our organization, but it's great to see the wealth coming here. Everyone has tremendous amount of knowledge to share. So it's incredible to be part of, and it's sort of as a reflection of the exercise you do. Is I feel that everyone has a clouded perception of what what everybody else does, right? And then bringing those parties together, as you brought them, basically brought home the clarity of what we need to know, right? Know exactly who it is that we're dealing with, and understanding where do you come from, right? And then I used to be part of these social justice program at King's University College, and I was privileged to take university students overseas for experiential learning opportunities. And my job was to sort of host, translate, help them out, and sort of have debriefing sessions. And one of the things I learned to say to them is like, remember why we're here. So on that note, I like to tell everyone, let's remember why we're here. Thank you.
Very good, very good. Okay, so let's make this a little bit more deliberate. Joel, maybe you want to context this a little bit? Sure. And let's open up the conversation a little bit, and then we're going to close at just around 2 o'clock. So we're still on schedule, and I'd like to make just a few closing comments at that time, if I could.
Absolutely.
But let's context what we're doing now.
Sure. So, sitting as a participant, I was thinking of something that was starting to happen. I was actually in the third rotation, so I was listening. Excuse me, I was asking questions a little more. Then I was listening, and then I got to speak, which is usually not the way it works for me. I'm a work in progress. But what I started to learn as I moved through the deep listening that it takes to start to develop that community, those three of us, is that the story I told on the third round was actually defined by the thematics of the previous two, which is to say the contours of their story started to shape my story. So what I picked up here was the idea of our story, of the work we do is somehow deeply personal. And what I picked up here is that the work we do is connected to a sense of deep responsibility. So for the last session, in the last 10 minutes, in some ways I want to pick up both of those ideas. Community engagement, and what we're speaking to today, is in many ways, I think, bridging work between two bodies of knowledge or two locations. And I think as it becomes important, as that great change that Paul is speaking about is coming about, and as we're turning to what Josh Lombier of the Public Humanities spoke to this morning of the civic turn of universities, we're also going to see community engagement and public engagement thrown around in very deep ways. And it's at a great expense, because it's difficult work. It takes lots of resources, as we learned on the panel this morning that was had featured faculty members and administration. So, practically speaking, I want us to just think about what we learned today through the three ways of how we try to program. Faculty on a panel speaking of community-engaged learning and scholarship, concurrent breakout sessions on community engagement where case studies or approaches were shared. We had with Anne-Marie, I think, community as classroom in a broad way. With Christine, we had partnership development in that cycle. And in our session, we had the idea of storytelling as a methodology in community-based participatory research. So in each of those, skills were sort of spoken of, community engagement tools were given. So as we wrap up, I want to think practically, maybe we can talk and share about a tool that we learned that might be appropriate in our work, or how we might start to connect with the university if we're from the community side. But under that, I actually want to speak to the deep responsibility, or the more important thing that it starts to point toward. Why is that engagement and that bridging that happens within that construct, within that tool, actually important? So when I introduced Paul earlier, I thought about, and toward the end of my introductory comments, I thought about, and mentioned it deliberately, rigorous forms of engagement. Right? So not a throwaway, not the easy work, but how are the tools we pick up today, the difficult and complex work that's associated with that, can lead us to our own deep personal responsibility. So maybe we can break down in groups, just at your tables, and speak about that work, and speak about the bridging that communities and universities need to do to tackle these challenges, and that, as we walk away with Paul's books, he speaks at great length at a practical and a very deeply responsible, philosophical way of why engagement is so important for us today. So practical and deeply personal and responsible necessity of engagement. And then we'll just share across, throwing some comments up to me and maybe speaking back and forth to one another. And then we'll conclude today and do a proper thank you. And all that in 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. So, parent share, please. I'm here to interrupt beautiful conversations. If we could start to bring some of the thinking this way. Paul says this orchestra is beautiful, but I have to be the bearer of bad news and interrupt it. So would anyone like to start by sharing with us a tool, a community engagement process strategy that might be applicable to their work, or they haven't heard about until today, or that they'd like to share. Don't all go at once. There's a lot of chatter. Would you actually share a tool, a community engagement process that you learned about today that might be applicable to your work, or you learned about in general? To put a fine point on it, Paul had us converse in a way that was really sort of profound and really moving, but in another way, it was actually a framework in which to establish community and have conversation. So if you wanted to reflect on that, or if you were in the concurrent sessions, or at a curriculum level, or thinking about community engagement processes, our faculty panel this morning. Part of what I'm trying to do is trying to connect the three waves of Engage Western today. So what's maybe a practical tool, or any other reflections generally? Sure.
I came to Engage Western today because I knew that one of the goals for continuing studies is to form an advisory group. And to my colleagues who are here, I know that we've discussed this for the last 4 years, but we've never been able to get traction on it. So when Paul shared his case study, it actually caused me to think more about how that dialogue that you had had with the Aboriginal community was essential in moving forward and making change. And that is a practical tool that I would like to go forward with. And I really did want to stand up in front of this whole room and say that, but I think this is making me live up to that plan. And in the session that I was at, the concurrent session with Christine, she talked about the importance of building partnerships and being strategic about the people who are members of that partnership. So I look around this room, I think there are people who could either be part of that advisory group or could recommend people they know in this community to be part of that advisory group. I know that there is one person in this room that I already want to have on that advisory group, and I'm looking at him, it's Jack. But I would like to invite everyone in this room to share that with me if they do have somebody that they'd like to recommend. Thank you. Yes, I wrote it first thing this morning. So thank you.
Thank you. Just got to cover. Okay, right here. And maybe for the sake of introducing yourself, you could say why you're here today and what organization you represent with.
So my name is Cara Finn, and I'm the general manager of the Business Help Center, which basically does support for small business all throughout Middlesex County. And I came last year, and I'm here again this year. We do a lot of community economic development, and we tap into Western on a few different fronts and work with a few different departments. But last year we talked about it, and I think it needs to be brought up again, is we need to almost force a mechanism, and whether it be through advisory groups or focus groups. What happens sometimes, of course, to all of us when we do our focus groups and things is we tend to tap the same group. It's the converted, and we just talked about that in our group here. We need some kind of mechanism. We talked about it last year, whether it be a web portal or something. I don't know necessarily what it looks like, but speaking to responsibility, we all have one, whether we're community members, whether we're members of faculty or students, we all have a responsibility to share the opportunities or the possibilities. And I think, if there was some sort of web portal or something that displayed opportunities similar to that, only on a much larger scale, that it was open publicly and that we let people know about, because within this room we do have the power to get out to all of our networks. I think that would go a long way to start the ball rolling. I mean, if we want to talk about engagement, whether it be little tiny baby steps or big projects, there are ways in which we could do a better job of letting people know about them. So
Wonderful. Call to action, a wall of collaboration online. And I'm also thinking about that point because I represent the public humanities of Western. And part of what we started to think about is how can the arts and humanities move into the public in a sense and co-produce knowledge. And this is, again, maybe an engagement tool that I could share up. And it was presented today by my colleague Joshua Lambier and a PhD and MD student, Tavis, at our session on sharing stories. Because we've actually used events-based programming as a way to create opportunities for a citizenry, which is to say the bridging and the access to all kinds of people that are not in the organizations or the universities. The word converted was being used a lot today. So in some ways, not the converted. One quick example that was presented on today is a project we have called Stories of Illness and Health. And Josh so eloquently put it that, in short, it's patients self-identified through medicine and through connections with doctors actually take the stage at the public library and tell their story of illness. As Josh said today, isn't that the one thing we all share in common? So we use storytelling, in a sense, and events-based programming, if I'm talking practically just about a tool that we can use as an engagement process to access people that aren't the converted, to use some of that terminology. So events are actually really important, and I think that's in some ways how we see Engage Western working, too. Is there any other comments? Mike? So we're just about moving toward 2, so he'll be quick. I know, I'm not sure about that. Sorry. So he'll make a comment, and then actually we'll move to Paul had some closing comments, and Stephanie from Student Success wanted to extend her gratitude for each outcome.
So my comment is just another following up what's called the actions, which is just the, well, hearing the Tamarack story, seeing that as a research kind of project, you know, it makes you a bit jealous being inside the institution where if you were going to engage in that kind of a project, the kinds of red tape that you'd have to go through. I don't suspect you have to submit that to an ethics board and then go through months of deliberating how that would actually look, things like that. So the call to action is essentially that not only is the ethics board a serious barrier to doing research that's meaningful in organizations for academics, but the second piece is even the relationship building and the knowledge mobilization that comes through the work that's meaningful to community organizations is not acknowledged inside the university institution as meaningful work, right? So therefore, if you're a student or a faculty, you will actually most likely be experience barriers to your success in the institution for working with organizations, I think is the case. And so one very useful tool to address that is the community-based research group in BC there. Community-based research center. Yes, yeah, has a document, a wonderful document that's essentially a policy recommendation for universities to adopt to start to acknowledge types of work that are meaningful to communities that academics can engage in, that would then essentially incentivize academics to do this work. Like, for example, with the stories of health and illness, a major barrier is how do you translate this work into journal publications, right? As though journal publications are the only meaningful form of output that academics can do. Whereas opposed to, is it not the curation of these kinds of events, the theorizing of why you put these together, and the very delicate manner in which you help people go through that and all this other stuff, is that not academic work as well, right? Where it's years and years and years worth of training and theorizing and thinking and engaging that allow that to happen. That seems highly academic to me. But at this point, there is no recognition that I know of. Maybe someone can help us. There's no recognition that that's legitimate work for academics, from what I understand.
Yeah, and I think the working document you were speaking of was actually, because you sent it to me, and I was taking a glance at it. And there's at various points at universities, different organizations are actually trying to put that question up about what counts as academic knowledge and what matters. It's a good one. Thanks, Mike. Okay, I'm going to make my way back over to Paul. So thank you for, although it was cut a bit short, I think it's been a really rich learning day. And hopefully you exchanged cards and emails and all that good networking stuff. So you can continue the conversation. Be on the lookout for all kinds of events that all kinds of organizations, departments, faculties are putting on here. It counts to participate, because that's where that relationship can happen, and those deep, rigorous engagement tools, practices can start to take hold. So I'm going to pass it over to Paul, who's going to have some closing comments, and then we'll hear from Stephanie, who's one of the great organizers of the event today. She's going to offer up some final thank yous.
That's great. Okay, thank you. I think I've got my microphone. Hey, thanks again for being here and for thinking this through. I guess at one level, I've come to be a validator, as someone who's seen a lot and worked across the country and around the world on these issues. It's important what you're talking about. And in some ways, this work is about university and community coming together. But in reality is that the people that are here most likely don't need a lot of that, because you're already all there. So maybe in some ways, this is also an advocacy group, because you're advocating for more of this to happen. I want to really encourage that. I was a little harsh at the beginning. I did that more for effect. I'm a huge believer in university. Tamarack's moved our offices to the university. It's an important institution. It needs to change, and quickly. Not so much because it's not relevant, it's because the young people that are coming there are radically different today than they have been. And a lot of that is their access to information and how they deal with information. And that alone should cause you a bit of panic as a university. Because how information is being processed today by young people is so radically different than the way universities are processing information. So in that case alone, this discussion I would consider to be the most important discussion today at a university. So just feeling that, and feeling that you're not only on the right page, but you are the right page. Keep pushing, keep driving this, keep thinking about this. More importantly, I want to talk to those of you who are students that are here today. Own your education. There are so many avenues to become engaged in the community. And there are so many professors that make that part of their teaching. Start finding them. Use Facebook, use Twitter, use whatever you like to do. There's a Rate a Teacher website. Use it. Rate people. Use your technology to help each other understand who the good teachers are. Who are the ones that are going to let you do this type of thing? And vote by filling those classes and overfilling them. Find out of the teachers that don't give a rip, that are in their own head and in their own world and they're irrelevant, and boycott them. Don't go to their classes. Own your education. You're paying a shitload of money to come here, right? You aren't just coming here to get a degree. You're coming here because we out there, the community people who are here today, we need you desperately. And this world needs you desperately, right? And that's what makes today so terribly important. Thanks so much for inviting me and for having me with you.
Thank you to Paul for that energizing talk. We saved it to the end because we
hoped that you would have some words that would send people off with a sense of action. And I think you have. So if I can only echo that and say we've had some great conversations in the room, and folks have pointed out things that are working well, positive directions we're headed, but also spoken about the long road ahead and all the things that we have to fix and get right. So as you're saying those things to yourself as you leave today, put yourself into that equation. And if you've got an idea about a way that something could work better on this campus, or a way that we could be more effective in reaching out to community, in the development of events like this, in any type of thing that we've talked about today, say, what can I do to contribute to that change that I want to see? So I hope that we get to have more conversations like this. I think as one of the event organizers, I see lots of places that this could sort of branch off and take us that are really, really exciting. So thank you very much to Paul for coming and sharing with us, and for bringing your books, which, by the way, everyone's going to get to grab one on your way out. So your choice of his 2 best-selling books to take home with you, read, and have a conversation with somebody about. I'm in a book club, so I have to say this. It's great to read something and then talk about it with somebody else. So find somebody in your world, whether they were here today or not, and say, wow, I read this really profound thing in Paul's book, and I just simply must share it with you, and we must have a dialogue about it. So please do that. And I also want to thank folks that have been involved in today. So our panelists from this morning, who were tremendous in setting the tone for the conversation today, our concurrent session facilitators who did some great work. I saw lots of lively conversation and colorful sticky notes and flip charts going on, so I know good things are happening. 2, who else? I want to thank the University Students' Council, because they let us use this wonderful facility and the space that they have here on our campus for today. And finally, all of you for just coming, sharing, and being part of this. This is the 2nd annual event. Can you call it annual at the 2nd? Yes? Okay. So we hope to have many, many annual events, and hopefully sub-events that come out of this as well. We're in the infancy stage of this, and we're looking ahead. On that note, I'll thank Joel Burton and Anne-Marie Fisher, who put tireless amounts of work into setting up today and making it happen, and it doesn't go unnoticed or unappreciated. So thank you both very, very much. And on that note, we have a little something that we're going to give to Paul, and we'll send you off on your way with a book and an encouragement to keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you.